All right, guys, the U.S. Congress public hearing, all right, on Nigeria as a country of particular concern, as decimated by Donald Trump, and this is something that the country should actually be looking at, all right. And we also heard of some delegate that traveled to U.S. to actually discuss this same issue, but along the line, but it seemed like they were not giving attention at all to actually speak. Because yesterday I was listening to someone that actually, from this same meeting, all right, someone spoke and he was saying that, that the Nigerian delegates that were sent to US, all right, in respect of this same matter, all right, isn't honest enough in their conversations. Right. So I'm also going to allow you guys to hear all the discussions that happen here. And we have different types of categories of people that actually share their opinion in respect of what is happening in Nigeria, right? This Christian genocide in Nigeria and so many things. A lot of people with their opinions, and some also we are raising evidences, of things that actually happened to their families, right? Even though they are U.S. citizens. So they are letting you know that the experience they had during the time they came to Nigeria, their families came to Nigeria, it wasn't an experience that anyone would want to talk about on the social media. All right. So that would also open your eyes that even before these things started happening, there were some lapses that were ignored by the government of the state. All right. That the more they ignore it, the more things grows worse. And those same thing that was never put into consideration is same thing that we are suffering now. Right. So pay attention to what she said in this video, and I'll be right back.
And members of the committee for holding this very important hearing. The debate about CPC designation for Nigeria began in earnest in Washington last spring after you, Mr. Chairman, had introduced a resolution that urged CPC designation for Nigeria, as you had previously done in 22, and when the subcommittee held a pivotal hearing on the case for Nigeria's CPC designation last March. Thankfully, President Trump listened, and he made his decision based on two criteria. One, under the International Religious Freedom Act, that these were severe violations of religious freedom, and that the government of Nigeria, President Tinubu, was either actively engaged or tolerating these violations. Those are the criteria of the IRF Act. So Nigeria's multifaceted terror problem that has had a devastating impact on both Muslims and Christians alike is well known, but the long overlooked persecution of Nigeria's Middle Belt Christians by Fulani jihadi militias finally got Washington's attention when that March hearing was held, and Bishop Anagbe testified. The bishop gave startling firsthand testimony that described frequent raids on farmlands of his Makurdi diocese by armed Fulani Muslim herders who kill, rape, or kidnap residents, all the while shouting the jihadi battle cry, Allahu Akbar. Bishop Anagbe, who testified today as well, and I'm honored to be part of this hearing with him, related that 20 parishes in his diocese have been shut down because of these attacks. Moreover, he said, Nigeria's government was doing nothing to stop this. I agreed in my testimony then that Nigeria should be designated a CPC precisely because the relentless and systematic Fulani attacks targeting Middle Belt Christians are carried out with complete government impunity. By contrast, the government is fighting the terror groups in the north. So this is really key to understanding why CPC is warranted in this case. The bishop's frank testimony required heroic courage. He soon began receiving death threats. A few weeks later, Fulani militants attacked his home village and massacred 12 of his relatives and scores of others. The priest directing his Justice and Peace Office, who took the body counts and came to the aid of survivors in such attacks, has been forced to take temporary leave after credible threats to his life. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Chairman, you and White House officials who had met with Bishop Inagbe were appalled when you heard of this. The attack was part of the brutal pattern seen in hard-hit Benue and various other Middle Belt states, but it also raised the concern that this attack was in reprisal for his testimony to Congress, one organized not simply by nomadic herders, but by those in Nigeria who are close observers of Washington. 2 weeks after that incident, Yelawada, which is, by the way, only 5 miles from the state capital of Makurdi, that's Benue State, was hit by a large Fulani raid. Others have spoken about that. Over 270 Christians were murdered, and the victims included some who had been displaced from their hometowns by prior Fulani raids and had sought refuge in Yelawada because there's a military garrison there. The Nigerian troops there did not put up a fight against the and it was only dozens of Fulani attackers who swarmed in on motorcycles and some on foot, wielding assault rifles and machetes as their weapons. This has been going on for years, again with government impunity. Similar attacks are taking place elsewhere in the Middle Belt. To give one recent example, Catholic priest Father George Dogo told the outlet Truth Nigeria, which is directed by former State Department official Douglas Burton, that 10 days ago in Taraba, Fulani militants stormed through a local government area, indiscriminately killing 20 people and burning and damaging homes and churches. A survivor, Christiana Joseph, a 33-year-old farmer from Amadu village, told Truth Nigeria that as she was preparing to go to early morning mass, a Fulani militia arrived on motorcycles and shot into her house. She is quoted stating, "They fired for about 5 minutes, shouting Allahu Akbar. When the gunfire stopped, I went inside and found my husband of 14 years, John Joseph, already dead." Survivor Samson Haruna also stated that attackers on motorcycles with AK assault rifles strafed houses in his neighboring village. He said, "My neighbors, David Bawa and Titus Gregory, lost 5 family members between them. My house was riddled with bullets." According to the Truth Nigeria report on this Taraba attack, quote, "The Fulani militants that attacked were led by warlord Alhaji Tukur, according to community leader Usa. Wakori Diocese Bishop Mark Nzukwen called the crisis overwhelming and said that 335 Catholic churches have been destroyed and more than 300,000 Catholics there have been displaced beginning in 2015. That's just in his diocese. According to the head of a local security consultancy, Fulani militants plan and stage their attacks from an abandoned resort, now overgrown with vegetation, called Danjuma Farm, that the Fulani use as a cover for cattle grazing, he said. That's the head of this security agency. But that's just a smokescreen. And he commented that if the government wants to stop the attacks, they must clear out the terrorists from Danjuma farms. In a Daily Post Nigeria article, Reverend John Lekel, the director of social communications for the Wakori Diocese, that's the same diocese I've been talking about, described the situation as devastating, revealing that many rural parishes have been abandoned following sustained assaults that have claimed multiple lives and destroyed entire villages. Bishop Nzukwen told the respected ACI Africa outlet last year that, quote, "If peace is restored, the region's rich agricultural landscape could provide a prosperous future for its residents. Instead," he said, "there is food scarcity because of these constant attacks." And there are countless reports like this across the Middle Belt. I mention this one because it shows that Abuja has failed to act even when the Fulani aggressors are identified and their base from which they launch repeated attacks are known. This represents not only a horrifying pattern of severe persecution by Fulanis targeting largely Christian areas, but also a shocking pattern of government tolerance of this persecution. I want to give one last example from Plateau State that occurred a month ago. The Reverend Ezekiel Dechomo of Plateau, who's the regional chairman of the Church of Christ in Nations, told journalist and Jos on October 25th extremists have threatened to murder him from calling on the Nigerian and U.S. governments to help protect Christians against genocide. He told the Christian outlet Morning Star News, quote, "My life is in grave danger. Even as I speak, I am on the lookout for attacks. I no longer sleep with my eyes closed. I have been attacked before but escaped." The threats came after he appeared in a video on October 15, standing in a mass grave containing the remains of a dozen slain church members, reportedly killed by Fulani herders. And Mr. Chairman, there have been hundreds of priests and pastors killed in the last 15 years, targeted, not as the State Department reports that they were walking alone or unguarded on a road at night, but they've been attacked and killed in their rectories, homes, and inside their churches. As the Nigeria government issues denials and watches passively, with no Fulanis prosecuted and no Nigerian forces prepared to defend the vulnerable, the Christian death toll from Fulani militia attacks alone, leaving aside the terror attacks from Boko Haram and ISWAP and the others, is in the thousands, and Christian survivors in displacement camps number in the millions. The respected research group Open Doors cites Nigeria as now the world's most dangerous country for Christians because of their religion. Again, at this time, most Nigerian Christians are being murdered by Fulani militias, and they are the militia's special target. Aid to the Church in Need reported last month, quote, and this is the Pontifical Foundation that says this, Nigerian Christians in the Middle Belt are bearing the brunt of violent attacks from those identified as Fulani militants. Some insist that the violent aggression by the Fulani herders against the Christian farmers on their own land is the unavoidable result of climate change. The State Department Religious Freedom Reports have annually described these indiscriminate mass killings as clashes between two socioeconomic groups who fight over scarce resources brought on by climate change. Religion has nothing to do with it, they claim. This justification of Fulani violence has recently shifted. Now it is generally acknowledged that Christians are being murdered in cold blood, but it is being argued that more Muslims are killed in the violence, and this proves it has nothing to do with religion, they say. This argument is not factual, and it is irrelevant for CPC. The premise that more Muslims than Christians are killed is debatable, as the scholarly Observatory for Religious Freedom in Africa documents. In any case, most Nigerian Muslims live in the north, where Boko Haram and a plethora of ISIS and Al-Qaeda-linked Islamic terrorist groups attack them and non-Muslims alike, and this violence, too, is religiously based. However, significant for CPC criteria, the Nigerian military is actively fighting those terror groups in the north. By contrast, in the Middle Belt, where most of the Christians are being killed in recent years, and where Christians are the special target of Fulani herder militias, the government isn't lifting a finger against the Fulani militants. Instead, it is tolerating them and denying it is happening. I have also heard about sporadic Christian attacks on Muslim villages. To the extent that the government is not taking action in those cases, that is further reason for CPC designation. Political momentum to list Nigeria among the world's worst persecutors gained throughout October as the annual CPC review neared the year-end deadline, and reports of massacres kept coming. On October 21, the Pontifical Foundation, Aid to the Church in Need, issued its world survey that reported, quote, the number and ferocity of the attacks on Christian villages in the Middle Belt have led some experts to conclude that these incursions are a deliberate land grab to remove Christians and Islamize the region, end quote. Various high-level White House officials in the State Department were also hearing from groups of religious freedom activists on Nigeria. Later that week, President Trump made the CPC designation. For the first time, the issue of Fulani militias targeting Christians for mass murder received official U.S. acknowledgement when Secretary Rubio addressed this. This, in turn, got the attention of Nigeria's President Tinubu, who said he is willing to work with the U.S. Until now, he has not shown the political will to stop this Fulani violence. CPC, as you know, is a two-step process. The next step in the in this process requires the president to adopt a policy response. And we heard today from the State Department about what is being considered. And there are several actions that I also endorse. One is to, it's been raised before by Representative Moore, and it's my first recommendation, disarm Fulani herders. These militias are loosely organized. They don't have explosives or drones, don't use tunnels, suicide vests, or propaganda films. They are an unsophisticated, but nevertheless lethal force because they come armed with AK-47s and 49s, while their targets have only homemade pipe bombs to defend, pipe guns to defend themselves with. Assault rifles, such as those used by the Fulanis, are heavily regulated by Nigeria's Firearms Act and illegal for the targeted Christian farming villages. The act specifically only allows homemade what are called Dane guns, cap guns, and another muzzle loading guns. The act thus outlaws the firearms that would match the assault rifle firepower of Fulani militias and leaves the peaceful Christian communities essentially defenseless. President Tinubu should order the removal of Fulani heavy weapons, raiding their encampments at Dan Juma Farm in Taraba and other places in the process. He should direct the powerful cattle breeders associations, such as the Mayeti Allah Cattle Breeders Association, to cooperate in doing this. Two, fortifying targeted areas. So U.S. foreign aid in Nigeria in recent years has amounted to about $1 billion annually. Areas targeted by these Fulani militias should receive some of this aid to securely return home and reclaim their properties, rebuild, and defend themselves. For example, this aid could go toward intelligence sharing, the training and equipping of local private security guards, as well as other measures. Again, the Fulani militias are not the formidable foes seen in ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and their attacks could be prevented relatively easily, prevented and defended against by these basic measures. Humanitarian aid is important, and this should be for the victims of Fulani herder militia attacks, and this should be distributed through trusted local providers, including through the churches on the ground that are currently one of the main aid providers to the survivors of these attacks. And it's just, again, tragic and ironic that productive farmers now need food aid since they have been driven from their Middle Belt farms. 4, sanctions against those aiding, abetting, and granting impunity to the Fulani herding militias, including those sanctions should include high-level officials in the criminal justice system and the military. The U.S. should gather intelligence regarding official responses to the Fulani herder militias and review possible visa and Magnitsky sanctions for those aiding and abetting. The Fulani warlords' names are known or knowable. Out of all the, I think it's important to understand that out of all the violent attacks by Fulani herder militias, there have been only a few arrests. One involved the prosecution of a Fulani herder who was convicted of destroying melons at a melon company who received a 10-year sentence. It shows the government can get tough when it wants to. And 2 high-profile legal cases of violent attacks on Christians have seen movement in recent months. One concerns the Catholic Church of St. Francis in Ondo, where terrorists killed some 40 worshipers on Pentecost Sunday in 2022. Depositions are being taken in that case. Ondo's bishop recently told me, but the trial has not yet started. It's important to note that's not in the Middle Belt, it's in the South. The 5 suspects being held are said to be part of the East African Shabab terror group and are not members of the Fulani herder militia. The other case involves the Yelawada massacre itself, where charges are have been filed against 5 Fulani herders in September, and an extremely rare example of prosecution that I believe is attributable to the pressure raised by the CPC debate in Washington. Finally, the International Religious Freedom Act suggests as a possible policy response to CPC designation a binding agreement with the country to prevent further violence. So I think that that is something that should be considered as well. Um, uh, and unfortunately, President Tinubu hasn't shown the political will so far to direct the police and military action within his power. And he argues that because the police force is centralized under the Constitution, he is overwhelmed. He says that a constitutional amendment is required to give back policing power to the governors of the state, and that could take years. However, right now there exist legal ways he can shore up defenses within the targeted Christian areas. For example, decentralizing police commands internally, or empowering local guards, or deploying more mobile police units to states, and prioritizing referrals of state governor police orders for presidential review. So I suggest that the U.S. enter into a binding agreement with Nigeria to ensure this needed police protection against the Fulani militias. Since President Trump's CPC designation, I note some Nigerian officials, including generals of a force in the southern state of Ondo, who cite worries about securing Nigeria's wide open border, already asked for U.S. partnership in an effort to help, to quote, help flush out Fulani ethnic